Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me as always is Justin Gay, your host and director of content. A full lineup of NFL news. In segment one, we've got to talk about that NFL wildcard weekend. The Colts performed very well, got rid of the Texans. Dallas moves on, but they won't have Allen Hurns with them. And did you see the games on Sunday? That was probably the more exciting of the matchups, some closer games, and even a term, double doink, that we've never heard before. In segment two, we'll talk about the games coming up this weekend and also the college football national championship game. All of that and more on episode 232 of Talk Back.
We are back for segment one, and before we jump into the divisional round previews, we've got to talk about how we've got here. So let's talk about Wild Card Weekend. We'll go in chronological order. The first game on Saturday, as we predicted, with Houston being involved, wasn't exactly the most exciting game. Now I'm starting to understand why the Houston Texans always get plopped into that 4:30 spot on Saturdays. Eric, is it always like the Texans or Bengals, or it's always some weird team that gets put in that spot? Well, we kind of found out why when the Colts jumped up in this game 21-0. It looked like the Texans offensively just couldn't get it going all game long. The Colts at that point just kind of got more conservative, didn't really need to press the go button because they were just going to hold on to that lead. So now coming into this game, the Colts were already red hot. We'll talk about their matchup in segment two. So, Eric, how impressive has what Frank Reich and Andrew Luck have been able to do this year when really it seemed like the expectations for this team were pretty low based off just not knowing how Andrew Luck would even come back, and even Josh McDaniels spurning this team in the offseason?
I got to tell you, Justin, I'm very impressed with what the Colts did, especially with the start that they got off to this year. One of the teams that we really looked at in the first 4 to 5 to 6 weeks of the season and thought, well, Andrew Luck's playing football again, but it doesn't seem to matter because they're at the bottom of the division. Then they go on an absolute tear. I know they played a lot of teams that really weren't top-notch teams, but it doesn't matter. They did what they needed to do to get into the playoffs, and then they go into this round, and I think you and I both agreed it felt like they were going to be really motivated in this game, and I thought the Texans were going to have a hard matchup because it just felt to me like Andrew Luck is now in the playoffs with a decent team around him, protection behind the line, which he hasn't had in a long time. He's got a running back in Mack that seems to be doing very well for them and getting their schemes on offense to where he can get the ball downfield because the defense isn't really sure if they're going to run the ball, and that opens up Andrew Luck to do what he does. I'm not real high on Andrew Luck historically, but I did watch this game, and I thought he played very, very well. And you look at how they got into the game so quickly on offense, really just lit them on fire as far as the Texans go. And I think from that point on, the Texans, I think they were a little shell-shocked. I mean, they're at home. They were the division leader going into that game, and so you kind of got the sense that they thought this was going to be a little bit easier. But I think they got hit by Reich and Luck and, quite frankly, just a hungrier team that was willing to put the pedal to the metal a lot sooner. What concerns me about the Texans moving forward is that All year long, Lamar Miller just doesn't really move the needle in the backfield the way that the Texans need him to for a quarterback like Deshaun Watson to open up and spread the offense and do what he really can do with all the talent he has, either running the ball or going downfield. I like Deshaun Watson a lot, and we saw near the end of that game when push comes to shove, he can play ball. But I just think that when they got behind early, it left them shell-shocked. They thought this was going to be an easier match, and they got up against a hungrier team. So to answer your question, I give Andrew Luck, I give Frank Reich, I give them a lot of credit for coming up from the depths of the basement early this season to where they are now, headed into the second round of the playoffs. I think you got to give credit where credit's due.
And that's big coming from you because you've never really been high on Luck. So you've watched him a lot more this year. Have you seen a change in him from that kind of freewheeling guy who was a little bit loose with the football, taking bad sacks? Do you feel like you've seen a change in him under the tutelage of Reich?
I actually do. I feel like he's much more in control of the game plan, and he's not so much of a gunslinger. What always bothered me about Andrew Luck, I mean, nothing personal at all. He was obviously a great quarterback coming out of Stanford, and everybody thought he was going to be one of the greatest of all time. But the problem is his first couple years in the league, everyone just talked about, these fourth quarter comebacks and look at what he can do, bringing the team back. It just kind of annoyed me because the reason they always had to make those comebacks was because Andrew Luck would throw so many interceptions in the first half of ball games. And I got thinking, this guy's just overrated. He can gunsling it and make a bunch of mistakes in the first half. And then the media and everybody wants to talk about how great he is when he has these comebacks all year long. However, he didn't take as many sacks this year. He got rid of the ball. I think he's protecting himself a lot better, which why wouldn't you when you've had the injury issues that he's been coming through? And so I think it just proved that with a little bit of development, a little bit of patience, and maybe new coaching, you can make some changes that really can revolutionize your career. I think he's turned the corner for me. The way he played in Texas, I was impressed.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen with him is the fact that he's just getting the football out of his hands a lot quicker. His decision-making seems to be much sharper. And I think what they did in the draft, addressing the offensive line, and you can go back to our shows we did pre-draft where we were talking about what we thought the teams in the top 5 would do. And with Denver, as a Bronco fan sitting at 5 and knowing the needs that that team has at the offensive line, I was all in on them jumping up at 5 and taking Quentin Nelson. Bradley Chubb falls to him, so they take him. But you're seeing the fact that the Colts were able, with their first 3 picks in this draft, to really address issues on this team. Get 2 linemen, get maybe the defensive rookie of the year in Leonard on that team. And it's just sort of turned it around. And I think Luck got just so beat up because his line was so awful. Everything seemed to be on him because that team, it felt like it was all Andrew Luck and T.Y. Hilton. That was it on this team. And now you've seen them integrate Ebron into the system, Inman getting touchdowns. They're not really deep at the wide receiver position in terms of top-end talent, but they have a lot of guys that just play their position very well, block well in the run game. You've seen Marlon Mack come in and run the ball very well for them. They had some long drives. They really controlled the ball in that game. So it wasn't a surprise to us. We've been talking about the Colts for weeks now. We were talking about it on Twitter over the weekend that this isn't a surprise. Back in November, we were on this team that we started to see them play better. A lot of from the national side didn't really pick this team up because it felt like they hadn't really had that signature win, even beating teams like Jacksonville. They were down, so that win didn't feel like it counted as much, but they just kind of kept that momentum going, and they're certainly going to need that this weekend. We'll talk about their Chiefs matchup when we come back in segment 2 later on in the show, but let's talk about this from the Texans' point, Eric. You talked about them a little bit, talked about kind of their need at the running back position, certainly their need to get more diverse on offense, just not solely relying on either Deshaun Watson to make a play with his legs or just to find DeAndre Hopkins. Heard some people kicking around the idea of a Le'Veon Bell, DeAndre Hopkins, Deshaun Watson type of combination in Houston. But from your side, watching this team, what do you think they need to improve on to take it to the next level? Because they're kind of getting old now, playing well in the regular season and then falling out of contention in the first round of the playoffs. It seems every year.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because for me, it comes down to really 3 things. Number 1, I think they have to move on from Lamar Miller at running back. I think he had a lot of promise a couple years ago, and it just seems like his degradation is getting worse and worse. A lot of people drafted him in fantasy this year thinking that he's a threat to catch the ball out of the backfield, and he's also a pretty good cut and run guy. But he just didn't get the stats that you need out of a running back. And Alfred Blue, he just doesn't really spell him very well. It's not a good combo. They need to move on, and they need to figure out a better running combination. So if they want to pick up a guy like Le'Veon Bell, I mean, look, if he can be happy with whatever contract he gets and stay off the weed, then I think it'll be something that would benefit the Texans. But on offense, another thing they've got to do is get more weapons. I know they're down a DT because of his injury, and that certainly didn't help, and shame that happened to him. So you have to go back then and, now we don't have Fuller, now we don't have DT. We're back to DeAndre Hopkins, a great receiver. So kind of one-dimensional. I know you have others too in the wide receiving core, but really Hopkins, they look to him so much. But the other need this team has is tight end. They haven't had a good tight end in a while. And I look at that as a problem because it really cuts off what they can do in the middle of the field. So I think offensively, running back and tight end and more diversification on wide receiver. But then on that defensive side, you can't just let a team get up on you 21-0 at no time, because that really demoralizes your defense. It really makes your offense feel like they've got a lot to accomplish in the next 3 quarters. So I think defensively, they need a couple of pieces in the secondary. I love J.J. Watt. I love what's going on there, but he can't do it all by himself.
No, I think you hit on it there. I think offensively, you hit the position. I think from the defensive side, their secondary just feels like it just hasn't played. There's been holes in it all year. Even in their win streak, they beat up on some bad teams too to get that 9-game win streak they have. And I think it hid some of their inefficiencies on the defensive side of the football. So I definitely think they have some holes to fill, but they have a nice core, but they just need more. They just can't depend on Hopkins and Watson as their only 2 real weapons. Now, when Fuller's in there, his stats with Watson are pretty ridiculous, but he just can't stay on the field. He just can't stay healthy. So it almost feels like, yes, they'll get him back next year, but coming off of a pretty serious injury, what's he going to be like? Is he going to be the same guy with that top-end speed? And can they continue to depend on him, or are they going to have to go out and sort of look for his replacement this year, either in the draft or free agency? So, Eric, let's take it to the Saturday night game with Dallas. They took care of business at home, and it was Zeke Elliott, as we talked about last week. He had 30 carries in this game. Amari Cooper was over 100 yards. Dak had a passing touchdown and another rushing TD, had some big runs there. We talked about him being a quarterback that could move the chains, and he was going to need to do that in the playoffs, and he did just that huge 3rd and 14th conversion late in that game. So, Eric, it seems like this Dallas team, they've got their top-end running back, they've got their wide receiver 1, and they're relying quite a bit on Dak now. So it seems like that's the trio that's going to take this team where they need to go. In his first 2 matchups with Seattle, didn't put up great stats, but he gets the win on Saturday night, moves Dallas to the divisional round versus the Rams. So where's your confidence level now in Dak?
Anytime the Cowboys get a performance out of Dak like what they got with Seattle this past weekend, I think they've got a really good shot at winning. We've talked about their defense the past couple of weeks. We've talked about Zeke Elliott when he gets going in a game, when he gets enough touches to really make a difference. He is a fantastic running back. Now they've got a weapon at wide receiver in Amari Cooper that really stretches the field much further than what we've had with a Cole Beasley and even a Des Bryant, because he was just not the same guy that he used to be. I think this team is just at a different level when they play with that kind of confidence. I remember a couple years ago when Zeke and Dak were just fresh in the league. They were on a hot streak all the time, and they had a great time with post-game interviews. They just seemed like they were having a good time playing football. To me, that's what I saw with Dallas this past weekend. So if that's what you're going to get out of Dak and they're going to have a good time doing it, they're a more dangerous team, especially with that defense. So, Justin, I was really impressed with Dallas this weekend, to be honest with you.
I think the one thing you're seeing with Dak is what we talked about is every quarterback just can't play the same way. Like, everybody's not just going to be a pocket passer. That's not what Dak is good at. So get him on the move. I'm not saying he has to be Lamar Jackson and run the ball 20, 25 times a game, but let him have those moments where, hey, if they're in man coverage and he breaks containment, let him go. Let him feel like he can do that. He doesn't have to just stand back there and go through his progressions. He's got the athletic ability to be able to get out and run at times and put that pressure on the defense. So maybe in certain situations, they can't go to man coverage. They have to play more zones, and then he can find more holes in the defense. But it just felt like they finally sort of turned him loose. They finally let him feel like, okay, just go out there and play football. Go out there and make plays in this game. And that's what he did on Saturday night. When the ball was in his hands, he just made good decisions in this game the majority of the time. He didn't take a lot of bad sacks like we've seen him do. I thought he played a really good game, and my confidence in him is starting to grow. It's starting to get better. He looked a little bit more accurate. He has the last couple weeks of the season. He's shown the ability, even in that Giants game, to be a guy that can throw the football if they need him to do so. But, Eric, it also felt like in this game, from the flip side on Seattle, they didn't turn Russell Wilson loose. It felt like Seattle was ultra conservative in this game. And as much as